from Hyderabad, India, for this Monday morning Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam discussion. Today we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 8. Before we discuss on this verse, let's sing Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Shri Radhe. Jai Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Shri Radhe. Jai Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahans Parajivakacharya Ashtotra Shatashi Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai, प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय, श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय, वृंदावन धाम की जय, मथुरा धाम की जय, जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय, गंगा माई की जय, यमुना देवी की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, सामवेद भक्तवृंद की जय. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshatarine Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu Krishne Matirastu. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, entitled The Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 2, Text 8. Kecit sva-dehāntar-hṛdayāvakāśe prādeśa-mātraṁ puruṣaṁ vasantam catur-bhujaṁ kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha gadā-dharaṁ dhāraṇayā smaranti kecit sva-dehāntar-hṛdayāvakāśe prādeśa-mātraṁ puruṣaṁ vasantam catur-bhujaṁ kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha gadā-dharaṁ dhāraṇayā smaranti kecit sva-dehāntar-hṛdayāvakāśe prādeśa-mātraṁ puruṣaṁ vasantam catur-bhujaṁ kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha gadā-dharaṁ dhāraṇayā smaranti. Synonyms: kecit, others; sva-dehāntar, within the body; hṛdayā-avakāśe, in the region of the heart; prādeśa-mātraṁ, measuring only 8 inches; puruṣaṁ, the personality of Godhead; vasantam, residing; catur-bhujaṁ, with 4 hands; kañja, lotus; rathāṅga, the wheel of a chariot; śaṅkha, conchshell; gadā-dharaṁ, and with a club in the hand; dhāraṇayā, conceiving in that way; smaranti, do meditate upon him. Translation: others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body, in the heart, in the region of the heart, and measuring only 8 inches, with 4 hands, carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conchshell, and a club, respectively. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. The all-pervading personality of Godhead resides as Paramatma in the heart of each and every living entity. The measurement of the localized personality of Godhead is estimated to expand from the ring finger to the end of the thumb, more or less 8 inches. The form of the Lord described in this verse, with distribution of different symbols beginning from the lower right hand up and down to the lower left hand with lotus, wheel of a chariot, conchshell, and club respectively, is called Janardana, or the plenary portion of the Lord who controls the general mass. There are many other forms of the Lord with varied situations of the symbols of lotus, conchshell, etc., and they are differently known as Purushottama, Achyuta, Narasimha, Trivikrama, Hrishikesha, Keshava, Madhava, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Sankarshana, Sridhara, Vasudeva, Damodara, Janardana, Narayana, Hari, Padmanabha, Vamana, Madhusudana, Govinda, Krishna, Vishnumurti, Adhokshaja, and Upendra. These 24 forms of the localized personality of Godhead are worshipped in different parts of the planetary system. And in each system, there is an incarnation of the Lord having a different Vaikuntha planet in the spiritual sky, which is called the Paravyoma. There are many other hundreds and scores of different forms of the Lord, and each and every one of them has a particular planet in the spiritual sky, of which this material sky is only a fragmental offshoot. The Lord exists as Purusha, or the male enjoyer, although there is no comparing him to any male form in the material world. But all such forms are Advaita, non-different from one another, and each of them is eternally young. The young Lord with 4 hands is nicely decorated as described below. Before we discuss on this verse, let us offer some prayers. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Nama Shreshtham Manamapi Shachiputram Atra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Murupurim Mathurim Goshthavati Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Adadandastranam dante idam yachah punaha punaha Shriman Rupa Padambhojam Dhulisyam Janma Janmani. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadādhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 8. Kecit sva-dehāntar-hṛdayāvakāśe prādeśa-mātraṁ puruṣaṁ vasantam catur-bhujaṁ kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha gadā-dharaṁ dhāraṇayā smaranti. Translation: Others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body in the region of the heart and measuring only 8 inches, with 4 hands, carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conchshell, and a club, respectively. So we have been hearing about this discussion from Srila Shukadeva Goswami to Srila Parikshit Maharaj. And in these particular verses of Canto 2, Chapter 2, we have been hearing how Srila Shukadeva Goswami has been describing about, he started with the description about the universal form of the Lord. And we have understood from the previous verses about the universal form. It is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Vadanti tat tattva-vidas tattvam yadjnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. So it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the realization of the absolute truth takes place. It is advayam. It is non-dual. So the people who are the seers of the truth, Vadanti tat tattva-vidam, Vadanti tat tattva-vidas Jnanam yat advayam. So the people who have seen the truth, the wise, bahunam janmanamante jnanvan mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti sa mahatma sudurlabha. So the seers of the truth are the people who, after many, many births of rendering loving devotional service to Krishna, understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and everything belongs to him. Vasudeva sarvamiti. And such a person who understands this, that everything belongs to the son of Vasudeva, Sri Krishna, such a great soul is very rare. So these very rare souls they are called tattva-vidas, one who knows the truth, the absolute truth. And they have told that this understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is in the phases that are non-different. So there is the realization of Brahman realization, Aham Brahmasmi. So this is a Veda Vakya where the understanding is that one is eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mamay vamsho jiva loke jiva bhutas sanātana manaha shashtani indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that every living entity in this whole universe, each and every living entity, are eternally part and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna mentions, Mama eva amsha, jiva loke jiva bhutas sanātana. Eternally, they are my part and parcels. Then what is the reason that this struggle in the material universe happens? Karshati, prakriti sthani karshati. This struggle in the material universe happens when there is identification with the five senses and the mind. Manaha shashtani indriyani, and the mind is the main owner of all the senses. In the sense that wherever the mind is, all the senses go in that direction. So that is why it is mentioned about, and we have been saying this in many of our discussions about how when it is talked about Kulashekara Alvar, it is mentioned Savai Manaha Krishna Padaravindayo Vachamsi Vaikunta Gunanu Varnane Karo Harer Mandiram Arjanadishu Shrutim Chakara Chuta Satkathodaya. So it is mentioned about Ambarish Maharaj actually. It is Ambarish Maharaj who it is mentioned that his mind was always focused on the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai Manaha Krishna Padaravindayo. So that is when the mind is focused, then automatically Yasya Deve Parabhakti Yatha Deve Tatha Gurau Tasyaite Katitanta-hṛdayāvakāśe Prakashante Mahatmana. So it is mentioned in the scriptures that when one has loving devotional service, Yasya Deve Parabhakti, when one renders loving devotional service to the spiritual master, Yatha Deve Tatha Gurau. So one is rendering Yasya Deve Parabhakti. So the first thing that is mentioned in that verse is when there is loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in the same way that loving devotional service is done to the Guru as well. Yatha Deve Tatha Gurau. Tasyaite Katitanta-hṛdayāvakāśe Prakashante Mahatmana. To them, all the imports of the Vedic knowledge is automatically revealed. So this is the Sevon Mukhe Jivhadav Swayam Eva Swarati Ada. Atah Shri Krishna Namadi Na Bhaved Grahyam Indriyai Sevon Mukhe Jivhadav Swayam Eva Swarati Ada. That is, as it is mentioned in by Srila Rupa Goswami, that anything related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, starting from his name, Atah Shri Krishna Nam Adi, starting from his name, his pastimes, his paraphernalia, his eternal associates, everything related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be understood by blunt material senses. Na bhaved grahyam indriyai. Then how can one know? How can one know the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Seva unmukha. When one is eager to render loving devotional service to the Lord. And how does that loving devotional service start? It starts with jivhadav, from the tongue. So the tongue, the activity of the tongue is to vibrate and taste. So the vibration, when it is uttama shloka gunanu varnanam, when the vibration of the tongue is to glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when that is used, and to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So when the tongue is used in that way, in the service of the Lord, then with that loving devotional service, when the tongue, the other senses, and the mind is totally surrendered onto the lotus feet of the Lord, then automatically the revelation takes place. And what is this revelation? This revelation is Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Shabdyate. So we have been discussing about the understanding of the universal form of the Lord. So universal form of the Lord is this understanding where one is seeing that the Lord is present everywhere. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that Maya tatam idam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matsthani sarva bhutani na chaham teshu avastita. So Krishna mentions that by me, in the form of my energy, I am pervading everywhere in the whole universe. Maya tatam idam sarvam jagad avyakta murtina. And the jagat, the word jagat itself has got a significant meaning. Jagat means janma and gatva. So there is, Srila Shankaracharya mentions in Bhaja Govindam, punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jatare shainam, ihasan sare bahudustare, kripaya pare, pahi murare. So Srila Shankaracharya mentions, so this is the unfortunate situation in this material world, that since time immemorial, the conditioned living entity has been taking birth after birth after birth. Punarapi jananam, so that is ja, and punarapi maranam, that is gat. So one is taking birth, one is dying. One is taking birth, one is dying. And this is jagat. So this is the condition of this conditioned material world. So when one understands one's original nature as the eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the realization of Brahman realization. And Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita about the Brahman realization. Brahma bhuta prasannatma na shochati na kañshati samas sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. So Krishna mentions that when one understands one's original nature as an eternal part and parcel of the Lord, then there is no hankering and there is no lamentation. Na kañshati na shochati. This hankering and lamentation happens with the identification from the body. Whenever there is, and that is why it is mentioned by in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Pumsa Stri Mituni Bhavametam Tayor Mitho Hridaya Granthi Rahu Ato Graha Kshetra Sutapta Vittev Janasya Mohoyam Aham Mameti. It is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam how this conditional attachment to the material world causes one to think that whatever is related to me is mine. So therefore Krishna mentions na sato vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate sata ubhayorapi drishtantas tvanayos tattvadarshibhi. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that whatever is constantly changing, that is temporary, and whatever is eternally existing is permanent. And in the human form of life only, this realization can take place. The realization that whatever is external to myself is actually external. What does that mean? It means that dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantaram prapti dhiras tatrina mohyati. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that because there is the proprietor of the body called Dehi within the body, asmin yatha dehe, there is this change taking place within the body. There is this childhood, youth, and old age. Dehinosmi kaumaram yavanam jara. Similarly, tatha dehantaram prapti. So similarly, one has to give up this body. And dhiras tatrana muhyati. A sober person does not get bewildered by these changes that are taking place. So that is the Brahmabhuta stage where one clearly understands that this body is just a vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya. Navani grinanti naroparani tatha shariraya vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. As it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavad Gita by Krishna, that just like a person takes off old garment and puts on a new garment, vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grinanti naroparani. So the old garments is taken off and the new garment is put on. Tatha shariraya vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. Similarly, the living entity takes off the old body and puts on the new body. So this understanding is the Brahmabhuta stage. When one very clearly understands that it is just a cloth, the body is just a cloth, which has to be taken off at the time of death, and then a new cloth will be given when another body is taken up by the individual. When this is very clearly 100% fixed in the mind, then the person is prasannatma. The situation in that state is joyful, totally joyful. Why is a person totally joyful? Because very clearly person knows that apuryamanam achalam pratishtam samudram apa pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sa shantim apnoti na kama kami. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives the example of an ocean that is getting filled with lots of water from all the rivers. So similarly, in the conditioned state of existence, the living entity is getting lots and lots of impetus for enjoying the senses. Because in the conditioned state, the living entity is thinking that sense enjoyment is the only reality. There is nothing else other than sense enjoyment. That is, in the conditioned state, that becomes a very firmly fixed idea. And because the identification with the body is so strong, and the identification to enjoy the senses is so strong, one gets totally entangled in that enjoyment. And what happens after the enjoyment? One goes into a state of despair. So there is this, yatta dagre vishamiva parinami amrutopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma jnana prasadajam. So it is said about the happiness in the mode of goodness that initially it appears as a poison, but in the end it is nectarian. And that is the happiness in the mode of goodness. So for example, people might not like, if initially one does not have a taste, one might not like chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, continuously. One would not like it if the taste is not there. But if one thinks it as a poison and still one continues it in the direction of chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, in the end it becomes the nectar. And it becomes such a nectar that Srila Rupa Goswami describes it very, very beautifully. Tunde tandavani ratim vitanute tundavali labdhaye karna kroda kadambini ghatayate karnabhut devya spriham cheta sangana prangini vijayatam sarvendriyanam kriti no jane janita amrita kriyadbhir krishneti varnadvai. So it is mentioned by Srila Rupa Goswami that it becomes so nectarian that Srila Rupa Goswami prays that let me get millions of tongues, let me get millions of ears. When it comes into the mind, the holy names of the Lord, when it comes in the mind, it captures the whole mind. Cheta prangana sangini vijayate sarvendriyanam kriti. The whole mind gets totally captured by this wonderful sound vibration of the Lord. No jane janita kiyadbhir amrite krishneti varnadvai. And then Srila Rupa Goswami is saying that I don't know how much nectar is there in this two syllables, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. So this is the wonderful state one can achieve when there is this. Krishna doesn't. So patram pushpam phalam toyam yume bhakta prayachati tadaham bhakti upahritam ashnami prayatatmana. So Krishna, what Krishna wants is bhakti. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavanyaschasmi tatvata tato mam tatato gyatva vishate tadanantaram. So Krishna can be known only through bhakti. Na sadhyate mam yogo na sankhya dharma uddhava na swadhyaya tapastyago yato bhaktir mamorjita. So Krishna mentions to Uddhava that I cannot be known by na sadhyati, I cannot be known by yoga, I cannot be known by sankhya, I cannot be known by dharma, by religious execution. I cannot be known by swadhyaya, self-study. I cannot be known by tapa, by austerity. I cannot be known by tyaga, renunciation. Yato bhaktir mamorjita. But through devotional service, I can be known. Ananya cheta satatam yo mam smarati nityasha tasyaham sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yogina. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that if one is constantly remembering the Lord, ananya cheta, to the mind, satatam, constantly yo, mam smarati, remembering nityasha, again constantly, tasyaham sulabha partha. To such a person, I am easily available. Why Krishna is easily available to such a person? Nitya yuktasya yogina. Because that person is constantly engaged in loving devotional service of Krishna. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantascha dhridavrata namasyantascha mam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that such a person is constantly engaged in kirtayanto mam, satatam, constantly. Yatantascha dhridavrata. With full determination, such a person is engaged in remembering the Lord. Namasyantascha mam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. Constantly rendering loving devotional service to me. So this particular verse is mentioning about the next. Vadanti brahmeti paramatmeti. So this particular verse is mentioning about the Paramatma. Upadrashta anumanta cha bharta bhokta maheshwara paramatmeti cha apiyukto dehesmin puruṣaṁ para. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that he is Ishvara sarva bhutanam hṛdayāvakāśe Arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani maya. That the Supreme Personality of Godhead is present in the heart of all the living entities. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishta mattah smritir jnanam apohanam cha. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that I am in the heart of all the living entities, and from me comes smriti, jnanam, and apohanam. Remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So all the three. So if someone wants to remember Krishna, Krishna will give them all the opportunity to remember him. And if, on the other hand, someone wants to forget Krishna, Krishna will again give that opportunity as well to forget him. So apohanam. And if someone wants to get the transcendental knowledge, Krishna will give all the facilities to such a person so that that person can get the transcendental knowledge. This is the upadrashta anumanta cha bharta bhokta maheshwara. So Krishna is in the form of Paramatma, is overseeing everything, upadrashta, and then he is permitting, anumanta. He is bharta, he is the maintainer, bhokta, he is the actual enjoyer. Bhoktaram yajya tapasam sarva loka maheshwaram suhridam sarva bhutanam gyatva mam shanti mrichati. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that if one understands that Krishna is actually the enjoyer, bhoktaram of all the austerities and penances, yajya tapasam sarva loka maheshwaram, that Krishna is actually the owner of all the universes. Suhridam sarva bhutanam, and Krishna is the best friend of all the living entities. If one understands these three things, gyatva mam shanti mrichati. So Krishna gives the formula for real peace. What is the formula for real peace? When one understands that Krishna is the actual enjoyer, that Krishna is the actual proprietor, and that Krishna is the actual friend of all the living entities. If these three things are realized, then one attains peace. So, and we were discussing about the Brahma Bhuta stage. So there is no shochati na kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha. Because there is no hankering, there is no lamentation. The lamentation happens because a person is hankering after something and that person is not getting it. So when the person does not get what they hanker for, they will lament. But if there is no hankering, there is no lamentation. So na kañjati na shochati samah sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. So that is the vidya vinaya sampanne brahmane gavi hastini shuni chaiva shvapakecha pandita samadarshi. So this is the outlook of sarva bhuteshu ya pashyet bhagavad bhavam atmana bhutani bhagavati atmani esha bhagavatottama. It is mentioned about the topmost devotee of the Lord. So what is the topmost devotee of the Lord seeing? The Lord is seeing that yomam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sacha me na pranashyati. So as Krishna says that one who sees me everywhere and everything in me, I never forget that person, and such a person never forgets me. So this is the sadhavo hridayam mahyam sadhunam hridayam toham madanya tena janati naham tebhyo managapi. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, that I am in the heart of sadhus, and sadhus are in my heart. Sadhavo hridayam mahyam sadhunam hridayam toham madanya tena janati. The sadhus know nothing other than Krishna, naham tebhyo managapi, and I also don't know anyone other than the sadhus. So this is the transcendental position of. So this is dhyana avastita tadkatena manasa pashyantiyam yogina. So Srila Prabhupada mentions this particular verse in many of his lectures, where he mentions about how the yogi is meditating upon the transcendental form of the Lord within their heart. So dhyana avasthita tad gatena manasa pashyantiyam yogina yasyantam na vidus surasura gana devaya tasmai namah. So in this particular verse, this form of the Lord, Paramatma form of the Lord, the four-handed form of the Lord, is described. Shangam chakram gada pangaja iduvilasam nalatrikaiga sankirna shyama varnam hariva kulamaram pure mangalam shantakaram bhujaka shayanam padmanabham suresham vishwa-dharāṁ gagana-sadrisham megha-varnam shubhangam lakshmi kantam kamala-nayanam yogibhir dhyana-gamyam vande vishnum bhava-bhaya-haram sarva-lokaika-natham. This is a very beautiful verse mentioned in the scripture about this transcendental form, four-armed form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it is mentioned that he is Shantakaram. He is an embodiment of total peace, absolute peace. Shantakaram Bhujaga Shayanam. He is lying on Ananta Shesha, the Nag, Anantanag. Padmanabham. From his navel, the lotus is emanating. Suresham. He is the Lord of all the demigods. Sura Isha. Vishwa-dharāṁ. He is the foundation for the whole universe. Gagana-sadrisha megha-varnam shubhangam. So it is mentioned about his wonderful transcendental beauty and his color, the transcendental color. Megha-shyamam Padmanabham Suresham Vishwa-dharāṁ Gagana-sadrisha megha-varnam. So that is that newly formed cloud. That is the transcendental color of the Supreme Personality. Megha-varnam shubhangam. And all his limbs are divinely transcendental. Lakshmi Kantam, he is the deer of Lakshmi. Kamala-nayanam, his eyes are like lotus petals. Yogabhir dhyana gamyam. So this is the Yogabhir dhyana gamyam. So this is what dhyana avasthita tatkatena manasa pashyantiyam yogina. This is the yogis. The yogis are meditating upon the transcendental form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the four-armed form. Vande Vishnum Bhava-bhaya-haram. So let me offer my respectful obeisances to Mahavishnu, who takes away Bhava-bhaya-haram. He takes away this fear of constant repeated cycle of birth and death. So this is a conditioned existence in this material world, where in the Yoga Sutras it is mentioned avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. So they are called pancha kleshas. So all the conditioned living entities have 5 inflictions that are existing because of the conditioned state of existence. And it starts with avidya, ignorance. And therefore that wonderful Guru Vandana that we have, preme bhakti yaha hote avidya vinashiyate. So this is, when there is this loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, automatically the ignorance gets destroyed. This is Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chaya Dahetukam. So this, when there is loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva, Bhakti Yoga Prayojita, with lots of love and affection, if there is this devotion, Janayati Ashu Vairagyam. Immediately there is renunciation. So this renunciation becomes a byproduct of loving devotional service to the Lord. Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayat Ahetukam. And one gets transcendental knowledge, which is totally divine knowledge, which helps one to get attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is so in this particular verse, we can see all these different names of the Lord. The 24 names of the Lord are given by Srila Prabhupada. Purushottama, Achyuta, Narasimha, Trivikrama, Hrishikesha, Keshava, Madhava, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Sankarshana, Sridhara, Vasudeva, Damodara, Janardana, Narayana, Hari, Padmanabha, Vamana, Madhusudana, Govinda, Krishna, Vishnumurti, Adhokshaja, and Upendra. So this is this wonderful prayer that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Nam Namakari Baudha, Nija Sarva Shakti Tatrarpita Niyamita Smarnena Kala, Eta Drashi Tava Kripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdevam Idrisham Ihajani Nanuraga. This, when we read all these wonderful names of the Lord, it reminds us of that wonderful prayer from Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where he's saying that, O Lord, you have so many transcendental names. And each and every name is invested with fully transcendental powers. Namnamakari Bahutha Nija Sarva Shakti. All the powers are embodied in those names. Tatrarpita Niyamita Smaranena Kala. And there is no hard and fast rule in terms of remembering and chanting those names. There is no time, place, and circumstance needed to remember and chant those names. Tatrapita niyamita smaranena kala etadrashi tava kripa bhagwan mamapi durdevam idrisham ihajani nanuraga. So Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is taking that role of that conditioned living entity, and he is praying on behalf of the conditioned living entity and is saying that, oh Lord, you have so much wonderful names, and all the names have so much power, but I have not developed attachment to those names. Mamapi durdaivam idrisham ihajani nanuraga. I'm so unfortunate that I have not developed attachment to your names. Anuraga. So this is raga and anuraga. So it is rati sneha, prema, mana, raga, anuraga. So all these are high states of loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And where does this all start? It starts with Shraddha. Shraddhavan labate jnanam tat parat samyatendriya jnanam ladva param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. So the starting point of loving devotional service to the Lord is faith. Shraddha shabde vishwas karile sudrida nischay Krishna bhakti kaile sarva karma krita hai. So and that is the topmost state of loving devotional service, where one realizes that just by rendering loving devotional service to Krishna, everything else automatically gets done. That is the highest state of loving devotional service. And there is a beautiful verse, Yatha tarora mula nishechanena tripyanti tatskanda bhujopa pranopaharascha itendriyanam tata sarvarhanam achyutejya. So that particular verse is saying that just like Yatha tarora mula nishechanena, just like when we put water into the root of the tree, automatically the whole tree gets nourished. One does not need to give water to the branches, twigs, and leaves. Just by giving the water to the root, automatically the whole tree gets nourished. Just by giving the food to the stomach, the whole body gets nourished. So similarly, tatha sarvarhanam achyuta ijya. So when one worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead, achyuta. So this achyuta word has got every name of the Lord has got the meaning. Achyuta means one who can fall down. And achyuta means one who never falls down. So this is a transcendental position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan, Puruṣaṁ Shashvatam Divyam, Adi Devam Ajam Vibhum. So when Arjuna sees the universal form of Krishna, Arjuna says these prayers addressing to Krishna, that you are the Supreme Brahman, Param Brahma, Param Dhama, you are the Supreme Abode. Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitram, you are the most pure. Paramam Bhavan, you are the Supreme Person. Puruṣaṁ, you are. So Srila Prabhupada actually mentions here that the Lord exists as Purusha, or the male enjoyer, although there is no comparing him to any male form in the material world. So Purusha Prakriti Sthohi Bhumte Prakritijan Gunan Karanam Gunasangasyat Sadasat Janma Yonishu. So this is sometimes because the eternal soul is an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes the eternal soul is also being addressed as Purusha. So in that particular verse, it is mentioned that Purusha Prakriti Sthohi Bhumte Prakritijan Guna. So Karanam Gunasangasyat Sadasat Janma Yonishu. So when this misidentification with the Prakriti takes place, because actually the living entity is eternal part and parcel of Krishna. As we mentioned, Mama Eva Amsha, Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta, Sanātana. So eternally, the living entity is linked to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At no point in time, the living entity is unlinked. So it is linked, but there is this covering that is happening. So, Dhumen Avritam Vahani Yatha Adarshana Malenacha, Yatho Benavritam Garbhas Tata Thenedam Avritam. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that there are 3 different types of covering that all the conditioned living entities have. So one is like dhumen avritam vahnir. So one is like the smoke covering the fire. Then there is yatha adarshana malena cha. Another is like the dust covering the mirror. Yatho benavritam garbhas. And the third is like the womb, the embryo within the womb. Tatha tenedam avritam. So these are just the metaphors that are given in order to understand the types of covering that the living entities have in the conditional state of existence. So the covering that, like a smoke covering the fire, it is a very light covering. When the fire becomes strong, automatically the smoke goes away. So that is mode of goodness. The dust covering the mirror, it requires a good bit of effort from the person to actually remove the dust. So that is the mode of passion. And yatho benavritam garbhas. So, and the embryo within the womb, that is like a hard covering. So it's just a metaphor that is given in order for the living entities to understand that these coverings are there. And therefore, there is this cheto darpana marjanam, bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam, shreya kairava chandrika vitaranam, vidyavadijinam, anandambudivardhanam, pratipadam purnamrta swadam sarvatma snapanam, param vijayate Shri Krishna sankirtanam. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions in the first verse of Shikshashtakam. That is the process, that cleansing the mirror of mind, cheto darpana marjanam. Then there is this bhava mahad avagni nirvapanam. So this material world, this situation in the material world, there are three kinds of different troubles that exist. There is this adhyatmic, adi bhautik, and adi daivik. So adhyatmic trouble or infliction comes from one's own body or one's own mind. Then there is adi bhautik. Adi bhautik comes from some other living entity. Some other living entity is causing trouble, and that is a cause of infliction. And then adi daivik is some natural calamity that might happen, like an earthquake or floods, for example. So this is bhava mahad avagni. This is this bhava sagar. So this is the this material world is called this ocean of birth and death. And there is constantly this is like, it's like a fire, blazing fire. So bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam. So when this engagement in the Sankirtana Yajna, the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare is done. On the chanting of all these names that are given here of the Lord, Purushottama, Achyuta, Narsimha, Pradyumna, Sankarshana, Sridhara, Vasudeva, Damodara, Janardana, Narayana, Hari, Padmanabha, Vamana, Madhusudana, Govinda, Krishna, Vishnumurti, Adokshaja, Upendra. So there is this Ramadi Murti Shu Kala Niyamena Tishtan. Krishna Swayam Nana Avataram Akarod Bhuvaneshu Kintu. Krishna Swayam Samabhava Parama Pumanyo. Govinda Madi puruṣaṁ tamaham bhajami. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead has got these unlimited forms, unlimited names, and the mercy is unlimited. Everything is unlimited, and unfortunately, this cycle of birth and death is also unlimited. If one does not drown in the unlimited mercy coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one gets entangled in the unlimited cycle of birth and death. So therefore, when we discuss the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam verses that describes very clearly about Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. So this particular verse is talking about Paramatma. All such forms are Advaita, non-different from one another. And each of them is eternally young. So this is Advaitam, Achyutam, Anadim, Anantarupam, Adyam, Purana, Puruṣaṁ, Nava Yavanam cha. Vedeshu Durlabham, Adurlabham Atma Bhaktau, Govindam Adi Puruṣaṁ Tamaham Bhajami. So this is mentioned in Brahma Samhita about the transcendental forms and the names of the Lord. So that is Advaita. So there is no difference between these unlimited forms of the Lord. Advaitam, Achyutam, it never falls down. Anadim, it does not have any end. He does not have any beginning. Anadim, Anantarupam. And he has unlimited forms. Adyam, he is the first person. Purana Puruṣaṁ, the oldest. Nava Yavanam cha. So there is this contradiction here. He is the oldest person, but he is eternally young. So this is the transcendental position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Adyam Purana Puruṣaṁ Nava Yauvanam cha Vedeshu Durlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakta. That is a very beautiful line there in Sri Brahma Samhita. It is saying that it is very difficult to attain Krishna through Vedas. Vedeshu Durlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakta. But when one is surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is attainable. So Adurlabham Atma Bhakta Govinda Adi Puruṣaṁ Tamaham Bhajami. So this is the Tesham Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam Dadhami Buddhi Yogam Tam Yena Mama Payantite. So this Priti Purvakam is very important. That love for the Lord. Tesham Satata Yuktana. And this Satata, this constant, trying to remember the Lord constantly. Tesham Satata Yuktana, when one is connected with the Lord. Bhajatam Priti Purvakam. Rendering loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead with lots and lots of love. Dadhami Buddhi Yogam Tam Yena Mama Payantite. So Krishna says that to such a person, I give them the Buddhi Yoga. So what is Buddhi Yoga? Buddhi Yoga means that divine transcendental knowledge. So through which they can come back to me. Yena Mam Upayantite. So this is the Aham Sarvasya Prabhu Matta Sarvam Pravartite Iti Matva Bhajante Mam Buddha Bhava Samanvita. So when one knows that everything is coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Aham Sarvasya Prabhu Matta Sarvam Pravartite Iti Matva, when one knows this very clearly, Bhajante Mam. What does one do? One starts engaging in loving devotional service. Who is such a person? Buddha, an intelligent person. How does such a person engage in loving devotional service? Bhava Samanvita, with full emotion. And so that is the only thing that can be given to the Lord. That love and loving devotional service. And that love can come only voluntarily. It cannot be forced upon anyone. And how does that Naisham matis tavad urukramangrim sparshati yadanarthapakamo yadartha mahiyasham pada rajobhishekam nishkinchananam navranitayavat. This is said by Srila Prahlad Maharaj. Naisham matis tavad urukramangrim matirna krishne paratas satova. So this mati, this mind becoming absorbed in the lotus feet of the Lord. Naisha matis tavad uruk sparshati yad anarthapakamo yadartha mahiyasham pada rajobhishekam. But when one takes bath by taking the dust of the lotus feet of the loving devotee of the Lord, mahiyasham pada nishkinchananam navranitayavat. So that is the way of coming out of this cycle of birth and death. When somehow or other this tulayam lavenapi na swarga na purnavam na apunar bhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kimutashisha. So this it is mentioned in the scriptures that nothing can be compared. Sadhu sanga sarva shastrakaya lava matra sadhu sange sarva siddhihaya. That this and when gets this association of the pure devotee of the Lord, even just a moment of association gives one all types of perfection. And what is the greatest perfection? The greatest perfection is somehow or other getting attached to the lotus feet of the Lord. Yena tena prakarena mana krishne niveshe sarve vidhi nishedasyur etayor eva kinkara. So it is mentioned by Srila Rupa Goswami that some way or the other fix the mind on the Lord, on Krishna. Yena tena prakarena mana krishne niveshe. When the mind is fixed on Krishna, all the other rules and regulations are subservient to this main rule. Sarve vidhi nishedasyur. All the other rules and regulations, etayor eva kinkara, is subservient to this main rule. And what is this main rule? Some way or the other, let us fix our mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when we are reading this verse, kecit sva-dehāntar-hṛdayāvakāśe prādeśa-mātraṁ puruṣaṁ vasantam catur-bhujaṁ kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha gadā-dharaṁ dhāraṇayā smaranti. So this is a very beautiful verse where it is mentioned, others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body in the region of the heart and measuring only 8 inches with 4 hands, carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conchshell, and a club, respectively. So this particular verse is giving a very detailed explanation about the Paramatma form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's residing within the body in the region of the heart. So that is Sarvasya Chaham Hrudi Sannivishta. And measuring only 8 inches with 4 hands, Shankham, Chakram, Gadā-Dharaṁ. So that is lotus, wheel of a chariot, conchshell, and club, respectively. This is the Transcendental dhāraṇayā smaranti. So this is there is this dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So in the yoga, in the Ashtanga yoga, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So this is dhāraṇayā smaranti. So the dharana is that concentration. The concentration is so strong that one is totally the whole being is absorbed in that meditation. There's dharana. Dhyana becomes even more stronger, and samadhi is when one is totally absorbed in the lotus feet of the Lord. There is no coming out of samadhi. When one is in samadhi, that is the going home, back to Godhead in terms of total service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Krishna actually mentions Bhoga Ishwarya Prasaktanam Taya Pahrata Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Samadhavana Vidiyate. What is the totally opposite of samadhi? That is Bhoga Aishwarya Prasaktanam. When one is attached to the sense objects and this aham mameti, this when one starts thinking that whatever Ishwaroham aham bhogi, balavan sudridam sukhi. So Krishna mentions the different qualities of demoniac and the devotees. And the quality in the demoniac is one is unfortunately thinking that I am the Lord and everything belongs to me. It is just the opposite of the quality of a devotee. Because devotee knows very clearly that Vasudeva Sarvamiti, that everything belongs to Krishna. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam, Yatkincham Jagatyam Jagat, Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitha Magrada Kasya Sviddhanam. As it is mentioned in Sri Ishopanishad, that everything belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there is nothing that the living entity can actually give to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nothing. Because everything belongs to Him. What can the living entity give? So there is a similar example that is given when one goes into the water. One takes the water out of the river and puts the water back into the river. That is the condition of all the living entities in this whole universe. That there is nothing that belongs to any of the living entities. It is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the supreme proprietor, supreme enjoyer, and He is the supreme friend, the best friend of all the living entities. And when we remember this Paramatma form of the Lord, it is the as we said, Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavan iti Shabdyate. So there is this, the Bhagavan form is Goloke eva nivasati akilatma bhuto, Govinda. Ananda chinmay rasa pratibhavitabe stabirya eva nijarupataya kalabhi. Goloka eva nivasati akilatma bhuto, Govinda madi puruṣaṁ tamaham bhajami. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead is present in His personal form in Goloka Vrindavan. But He also spreads Himself everywhere in the form of His energy. That is Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyakthamurtina. So matsthani sarvabhutani na chaham teshu avasthita. So Krishna mentions that everything is based on me, but I'm personally not there. But a person who has got loving devotional service to Krishna can see Krishna personally everywhere. So that is the prerogative of the person who has totally surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we'll read this verse again. Kecit sva-dehāntar-hṛdayāvakāśe prādeśa-mātraṁ puruṣaṁ vasantam catur-bhujaṁ kañja-rathāṅga-śaṅkha gadā-dharaṁ dhāraṇayā smaranti. Others conceive of the Personality of Godhead residing within the body in the region of the heart and measuring only 8 inches with 4 hands carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conchshell, and a club, respectively. With that, I would like to close this discussion. Let me see if there are some comments here. Few comments. Mahesh Reddy ji saying Jai Shri Krishna. Bashish Patra, Hare Krishna. Sai Banala, Hare Krishna. Mohan Kumar, hello sir. Oka Manchi video. Namaskaram, Mohan Kumar, Radhe Radhe. Hare Krishna. Arvindam Mandal, Hare Krishna. Karan, Jai Ho. Karan, Balram Vishwas, Jai Radha. Karan, Cricket Lovers, hi. Habib. Thank you all so much. I don't see any questions here. It's Hare Krishna, hello and hi. Thank you so much for your time. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschate Deshadarine Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu Krishne Matirastu Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.